Hello, my name is Olivia. I am a student of English. I want to tell you about my life in New York. I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to speak English naturally. When I first came here, I was shy. I knew some words, but I did not know how to speak like other people. But I found a way to learn. Let me tell you my story. When I first arrived in New York, I felt like I had stepped into a different world. The city was big, loud, and full of people who always seemed to be in a hurry. I had seen New York in movies before, but standing in the middle of Times Square with bright lights flashing around me and hundreds of voices speaking all at once was overwhelming. I clutched my suitcase tightly, feeling small among the towering buildings. I had dreamed about coming here for so long, but now that I was here, I felt lost. I had studied English in my home country, but it was not the same. In school, I had learned grammar rules and vocabulary lists. I could write essays and pass tests, but speaking was different. When I heard people talking around me, I struggled to catch their words. They spoke fast, with different accents, and they used phrases I had never seen in my textbooks. Even when I recognized words, I could not always understand what they meant together. It was like everyone spoke a secret language that I was not a part of. I moved into a small apartment that I shared with another student. Her name was Mia, and she was from Brazil. She spoke some English, but not fluently. We both had the same problem. We were in New York, surrounded by English, but we did not know how to speak naturally. We helped each other when we could, but most of the time, we just stayed quiet, afraid of making mistakes. One of my first challenges was going to the grocery store. I needed food, but I was nervous about talking to people. I walked into a small store near my apartment and picked up a few things: bread, eggs, milk. When I got to the cashier, she said something, but I did not understand. I stared at her, feeling my face turn red. She repeated herself, slower this time. "Do you need a bag?" I finally understood, but I was too nervous to answer. I just nodded. She smiled and handed me the bag, but I felt embarrassed. Why was it so hard to say one simple word? The next day, I decided to explore the city. I took the subway, but it was confusing. The announcements were in English, but they spoke too fast for me to understand. I watched other people, trying to figure out what to do. I got on the train and hoped I was going in the right direction. At one stop, a man asked me, "Excuse me, do you know if this train goes to Brooklyn?" I panicked. I understood his words, but I did not know how to respond. I had to find a way to use English in real life. I had to listen more, speak more, and stop being afraid of making mistakes. The next morning, I decided to challenge myself. I would go to a coffee shop and order something in English. It seemed like a small thing, but to me, it was a big step. I walked into a small cafe near my apartment. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. The barista smiled at me and said, "Good morning. What can I get for you?" My heart started pounding. I had practiced this moment in my head. I took a deep breath and said, "Can I have a tea, please?" The barista nodded. "Sure. What kind of tea?" I had not prepared for this question. My mind went blank. I saw the menu, but the words did not make sense to me. Instead of speaking, I just pointed at a name on the list. The barista looked and said, "Oh, green tea." Great choice. I nodded quickly. When I paid and took my tea, I felt both relief and disappointment. I had spoken, but I had not really had a conversation. As I walked out of the cafe, I thought about what had happened. I had taken a step forward, but I was still afraid to speak. I realized that my problem was not just the words. I was afraid of not being perfect. I did not want to make mistakes. But if I stayed silent, I would never improve. I needed a new plan. I needed to learn how people really spoke in everyday life. I needed to listen to real conversations and understand how people talk naturally. And that is exactly what I decided to do next. After my small victory at the cafe, I knew I had to do more. Ordering tea was a start, but I still did not feel comfortable speaking. I had learned something important. I was not just struggling with English, I was struggling with confidence. I was afraid of making mistakes. I wanted to speak naturally, but I was too nervous. I needed a new way to learn. That night, I sat in my apartment, thinking. I remembered something my English teacher back home once said. If you want to speak a language, you must listen to it first. That made sense. When babies learn to speak, they do not start with grammar rules. They listen to their parents. They hear words again and again until they understand them. Then one day, they start speaking. I decided to try this. If I wanted to speak English naturally, I had to listen to how real people spoke. The next day, I went outside with a new plan. Instead of just walking through the city, I paid attention to conversations around me. I went to a park and sat on a bench. A woman was talking to her friend. She said, "Oh my gosh, I was so tired this morning. I needed my coffee." That sentence was simple, but I noticed something. She did not say, "I was very tired." She said, "Oh my gosh, I was so tired." In school, I had learned very tired, but in real life, people said so tired. I took out my notebook and wrote it down. So tired instead of very tired. A few minutes later, a man walked by talking on his phone. He said, "I'll catch you later." That confused me. Catch? What did he mean? Then I understood. He was not talking about catching something. He meant see you later. I smiled to myself. I had just learned another real-life phrase. "I'll catch you later" means see you later. I continued listening, at the coffee shop, at the grocery store, on the subway. Everywhere, people were using simple but different words than what I had learned in school. I wrote down every phrase I heard that was new to me. My notebook started to fill up. After listening for a few days, I decided to take the next step. I had to start using these phrases myself. The first chance came at a grocery store. I was waiting in line when the cashier greeted me. "Hey, how's it going?" I had heard this before. It meant, "How are you?" Normally I would say, "I am fine, thank you," because that's what I learned in school. But no one here talked like that. I wanted to sound natural, so I smiled and said, "I'm good. How about you?" The cashier nodded and said, "Good, thanks." Then she scanned my items. I felt proud. It was a small conversation, but I had spoken naturally. It felt different from before. I was not just using English, I was communicating. After that, I started speaking more. I still felt nervous, but I pushed myself. Whenever I went to a store or a cafe, I tried to say something extra. One day I went to buy a sandwich. I had already practiced what to say. "Can I have a turkey sandwich, please?" I was ready, but then something unexpected happened. The cashier asked, "White or wheat?" I froze. I did not understand. White or wheat? What did that mean? The cashier saw my confusion. She pointed to the bread and said, "Do you want white bread or wheat bread?" Oh, she was asking about the type of bread. I smiled and said, "Wheat, please." That moment taught me something important. I did not understand everything, but that was okay. If I did not know something, people would explain. I did not need to be perfect. After that, I became more confident. I started asking small questions to people. At a clothing store, I asked, "Do you have this in a smaller size?" At a cafe, I asked, "What's the most popular drink here?" At first, my sentences were not perfect. Sometimes I forgot words, but the more I spoke, the easier it became. One of my favorite moments happened in a bookstore. I was looking at a book when a woman next to me said, "That's a great book. You should read it." I smiled and said, "Oh, really? What's it about?" She explained, and I listened carefully. When she finished, I said, "Thanks. I'll check it out." She smiled and said, "No problem. Have a great day." After she left, I realized something. I had just had a real conversation with a stranger. No script, no practice, just normal, natural English. I felt amazing. I was finally using the language, not just studying it. Every day I learned more. I listened to people. I used new words. I asked questions. Slowly, English started to feel less like a school subject and more like a part of my life. I understood something important. The best way to learn English is not just from books, but from real conversations. One evening, I sat in my apartment with my roommate, Mia. She asked, "How was your day?" Without thinking, I answered, "It was great." I had a fun conversation at the bookstore. Mia's eyes widened. "Olivia, you sound so natural." I laughed. "Really?" Yes, yes. You didn't even think before you spoke. You're improving." She was right. I was not just memorizing words. I was living in English. And that was when I knew I was on the right path. After realizing that real conversations were the best way to learn English, I felt excited. I no longer saw English as something scary. Instead, I saw it as a tool, a way to connect with people. But there, my coffee. I tested myself. Could I go through the whole morning without translating? I tried thinking about my plans for the day. Instead of thinking in Italian and then changing it into English, I just thought, "Today I have class at 10. After that, I'll meet Mia for lunch." It felt natural, not perfect, but natural. I realized something. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was living in English. The changes didn't stop there. Every day I noticed more and more moments where English felt like my first response. One day, I was walking through a bookstore when I saw a mystery novel on display. I picked it up, read the summary, and thought, this looks interesting. I froze for a second. That thought had come in English, without effort, without translation. Another time, I was at a coffee shop waiting for my order. A woman next to me dropped her phone, and without thinking, I said, "Oh, here you go," as I picked it up for her. She smiled. "Thanks," I smiled back. "No problem." It was such a normal, everyday moment, but inside, I was celebrating. I had spoken in English, without hesitation, without fear. At home, I started watching TV shows without subtitles. At first, I missed some words, but I didn't pause or look them up. Instead, I just kept watching, letting my brain fill in the gaps. One evening, Mia and I were watching a comedy show. Something funny happened, and I laughed, before I even had time to think about why. Mia turned to me, smiling. "You got that joke?" I nodded. "Yeah, it was funny." And it was, not because I had translated it in my head, but because I actually understood it. Speaking naturally. The biggest change was in my conversations. Before, I was always careful with my words. I would stop, think, translate, and then speak. But now I was speaking without stopping so much. One night, Mia and I were cooking dinner together. She was telling me a story about her childhood, and I was laughing. At one point, I jumped in and said, "That's remind me of something funny that happened in my school." Mia smiled, but then she said, "Oh, you mean that reminds me?" I blinked. I had made a grammar mistake. A few months ago, I would have felt embarrassed, but now I just nodded and repeated it. "Oh, that reminds me. Got it?" Mia gave me a thumbs up. "You're getting so good at this, Olivia." And the crazy thing was, I knew she was right. The dream. The biggest shock came one night when I had a dream. In the dream, I was walking through the streets of New York. I stopped at a cafe and ordered a coffee. The barista asked me something, and I answered. We talked for a while, laughing and chatting like old friends, and then suddenly, I woke up. I sat up in bed, trying to remember the dream. What was strange about it? Why did it feel different? Then it hit me. The whole dream had been in English, not Italian, not a mix of both, just English. I sat there for a long time thinking about it. I wasn't just learning English anymore. My brain was accepting it as part of my life. And that was when I truly knew I wasn't translating in my head anymore. I was living in English. English became part of me. After that, I stopped thinking of English as something foreign. It wasn't just a subject I studied. It was part of me now. I didn't worry about sounding perfect. I didn't panic if I forgot a word. I didn't translate everything before I spoke. One day, I was sitting in a park, reading my book, when I got a phone call. It was my mom. I answered in Italian, excited to tell her about my day. But as I spoke, I realized something. I was struggling to find the right Italian words. I laughed. English had become so natural to me that now I had to think before speaking my own language. My mom laughed too. "Olivia, you're becoming a real New Yorker." And maybe she was right, because in that moment, sitting in a park, speaking English every day, thinking in English, dreaming in English. I felt at home. The moment everything changed. The day I realized that English had become part of my life, everything changed. I was no longer afraid to speak. I didn't second-guess myself every time I opened my mouth. I didn't freeze when someone spoke too fast. But most importantly, I felt like myself in English. Before, English was something I was trying to learn. Now, it was something I lived. One morning, I walked into my favorite cafe. The same cafe where months ago I had felt nervous just saying, "One coffee, please." Now, I stepped up to the counter with a smile. "Hey, good morning. Can I get a medium latte with oat milk?" The barista nodded. "Of course. That'll be $5.50. I handed him the money, took my coffee, and walked to my seat. It was such a simple interaction, just a few words, but as I sat down, I realized something. I hadn't planned my sentence in my head. I hadn't translated. I hadn't worried about whether my grammar was perfect. I had just spoken. It was normal. It was natural. And it felt amazing. Speaking with confidence. The next time I really noticed my progress was in my English class. Before, I always sat quietly. I listened carefully, took notes, and only spoke when I absolutely had to. I was afraid of making mistakes, afraid that people would judge me. But one day, my teacher asked a question. "What's something interesting you've learned since moving to New York?" Without even thinking, I raised my hand. Me. Olivia. The quiet one. The girl who used to be terrified of speaking. The teacher smiled. "Yes, Olivia." I took a breath and started talking. I learned that speaking English is not just about words, it's about confidence. At first, I was scared to make mistakes. But now, I realize that making mistakes is part of learning. Every time I speak, I improve. The teacher nodded. That's a great point. Language is about communication, not perfection. I smiled, and when I looked around, I saw my classmates smiling too. For the first time, I felt like I belonged. One day after class, a girl named Sophia came up to me. "Olivia, how do you speak so confidently?" she asked. "I still get nervous. I laughed. "Oh, Sophia, I used to be just like you. I was scared all the time." She looked surprised. "Really? But you speak so well now." I thought about my journey, the fear, the struggle, the moments when I felt lost, and I smiled. You know what helped me? I stopped trying to be perfect. I just spoke. Even when I made mistakes, even when I was embarrassed, little by little it got easier. Sophia nodded slowly. "So, I should just talk more?" "Yes," I said. "Talk, listen, repeat, keep going. One day, you'll wake up and realize that you're thinking in English without even trying." She smiled. "Thanks, Olivia. That really helps." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was helping others learn too. Living in English. As the months passed, my life in New York felt more natural than ever. I could joke with my friends in English. I could chat with strangers without fear. I could enjoy TV shows without subtitles, order food without hesitation, and share my thoughts without overthinking. One night, Mia and I went to a small party at a friend's apartment. The room was full of people, Americans, international students, all talking, laughing, sharing stories. At first, I just listened, but soon I found myself joining in. A guy named Jake was telling a funny story about his dog stealing his pizza. Without thinking, I laughed and said, "Oh, that reminds me of my dog back home. One time he stole a whole cake from the table." Jake laughed. "No way." "What kind of cake?" "Chocolate. My mom was so mad." The conversation continued, flowing easily. No fear, no hesitation. Just me, living my life in English. Finding my voice. One evening I was walking home from class, looking at the lights of the city. The same streets that had once felt huge and scary now felt familiar and welcoming. I thought about the girl I had been when I first arrived in New York. The girl who felt lost, who struggled with English, who was too afraid to speak. And then I thought about who I was now. A girl who spoke English confidently. A girl who made friends, laughed, and shared her thoughts. A girl who wasn't afraid anymore. I smiled to myself. I had done it. I had embraced my new life. I had found my voice. And I knew from that moment on, I would never lose it again. Your journey. Olivia's journey shows that learning English is not just about studying grammar or memorizing vocabulary. It's about living the language, embracing mistakes, and building confidence. If you're on the same journey, keep going. Speak every day. Push through the fear. One day, just like Olivia, you'll wake up and realize English is part of you now, and that will be the moment you truly succeed